welcome to episode 55 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. Visit us at letstalkbitcoin.com for our daily guest blog, all our past episodes, and of course, tipping addresses. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today is Satoshi Day. On November 1st, 2008, the Bitcoin white paper was released with little fanfare. And today, 5 years later, it's humbling to see how far we've come. As teased on episode 54, Alan Reiner, founder and CEO of Armory Technologies and lead developer of the open source Armory Wallet project, joins me today for an in-depth interview. Never heard of Armory? After this episode, that won't be the case. We talk paper backups, fragmented secrets, life as a funded open source project, features on the horizon, and much more. That interview occupies the middle of today's show and is almost exactly 30 minutes long. For the rest of the episode, Bitcoin 0.9 is coming soon, and it's packed with material that on its face might be a little tough to understand. Have no fear, Andreas is here. We start going through the list, to be completed on episode 56, and making sense of it all. Stephanie and I have lots of questions. Spoiler alert, things actually are going to get easier. So, happy Satoshi Day, everybody. May our next 5 years be as eventful as the first. Enjoy the show. So here on Let's Talk Bitcoin, we like to talk about complicated issues in understandable terms. And that's something actually we've kind of stopped saying on the show because it sort of became a thing we said all the time. But here, I think it's particularly applicable. Gavin Andresen, the lead developer on the Bitcoin project, put up a blog post on the Foundation's site called Core Development Update Number 5 that basically goes over everything that's coming in the Client 0.9 update. That update isn't out yet. It's going to be out, it sounds like, in the next couple of months. I don't think we have a firm date on it, but there's lots of stuff that's changing and lots of stuff that's happening in this update, and I think it's really important that we address this and break it down point by point. As always, I'm joined by Andreas M. Antonopoulos and Dr. Stephanie Murphy. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
We're going to jump right into this. This is straight from the blog post. We're going to go through this point by point and talk about each of the issues as they come up and kind of get a feeling for what's going to change in this coming major update. From the article, since my last update at the end of June, the core development team produced 2 minor bug fixes while working towards a major 0.9 release. We've reviewed and closed over 300 pull requests, which range from correcting the spelling of a word in a comment to major new features like the payment protocol. I'll highlight some changes that are already in the 0.9 source tree and then write briefly about some changes that we hope will be ready soon. The first change that they talk about is provably prunable outputs. Quote, there have been huge debates in the past about embedding data in the blockchain. Some people feel like the blockchain should be a public resource available to use for whatever people like as long as they pay sufficient transaction fees to make it worthwhile for miners to store their transactions. Others feel that the blockchain should only contain the data necessary to validate Bitcoin transactions and any other data should be stored separately. While the debate raged, clever people found a lot of ways of embedding data in the blockchain. So, with some reluctance, I, and again this is Gavin, recently merged pull request number 2738, quote, relay OP_return data TX out as a standard transaction type. The idea is to give people a way to do what they clearly want to do, associate extra data with a transaction that's secured by the blockchain, but do it in a responsible way that strikes a balance between you can put whatever you want in the blockchain and you'll have to be tricky and inefficient to get your data into the blockchain. Pull request 2738 let developers associate up to 80 bytes of arbitrary data with their transaction by adding an extra, quote, immediately prunable zero value output. So let's stop there for a second and talk about what this means. Basically, there are lots of uses out there, be it from using the blockchain as a notary and storing the hashes of like a contract that you signed in the blockchain, or sending messages, or we've even had people storing kind of illicit information. We talked about inappropriate links and things like that being put into the blockchain as a way of distributing it without associating legal liability.
Gavin really talks about provably prunable outputs, and it's a bit confusing because it's not clear what prunable outputs have to do with putting data in the blockchain. So let me very briefly explain this. Because there wasn't an official mechanism for putting data in the blockchain, people created fake transactions. And these transactions were to addresses that don't exist. So instead of, paying Bob at the coffee shop for your coffee and sending it to Bob's address, if someone's trying to use it for a notarization service, they send a tiny payment to a bogus address. And this bogus address is basically an unspendable output. because it can be used in a subsequent transaction to redeem that money because there is no key. It's not a real transaction. There's no way to unlock it. Effectively, the key that's supposed to unlock it is the data that you're trying to stick in the blockchain. It doesn't work as a key. It only works as a block of data that you put in there. The problem with this is that because you have to keep all of the possibly spendable outputs in a database in order to figure out if you can create a new transaction, what that does is every time someone notarizes something, it puts a transaction in there that's going to stay in the blockchain forever and will never be excluded from the pool of transactions because you don't know if it can be spent or not. It looks like a normal transaction. This solution is to create a transaction specifically for putting data. And because you know it's for data, and because you know it can never be spent, and because you know it doesn't have any value, only fees, then you can just basically discard it. The only nodes that need to keep that are nodes that are interested in keeping a full archival copy of the blockchain. It's no longer needed for normal operation and spending. So this is a great compromise. It gives us an official way of putting data in the blockchain without burdening it with fake transactions that we have to carry forever just in case they might be spendable.
Let me interrupt you for a minute though, Andreas. Up until this update gets made, any notary type data that's in the blockchain is going to stay in the blockchain. Is that right? Or can it be retroactively pruned out?
No, all of the junk that's in there is in there and will remain in there, but it's really not a problem at today's scale because all of these things are tiny and nascent services. So, you know, a far bigger problem was the use of unspendable outputs to signal the results of gambling on specific sites. And that was creating dust, as it was called, you know, microtransactions that are not spendable. In fact, most of that came from just a few gambling sites. This actually solves that problem too, because now you can send back a transaction that says that you won or you lost without it being a fake transaction.
So does this mean that the rate of growth of the blockchain is going to slow, perhaps?
Not really. The size of this new thing is about the same as the size of the old transactions. It's not really that different. So it's not going to make an appreciable difference in the growth of the blockchain. What it will do, however, is it will allow you to create nodes that are full nodes in terms of transactions, but don't have a full copy of every unspendable output because they can just ignore things that are not payable transactions. So you can separate the stuff that's in the blockchain from money from the stuff that's in the blockchain as information content. And some nodes can choose not to carry the information content or not to remember it or not to keep it in memory. So it gives them a way to differentiate.
But there's still going to have to be some like amount of nodes that are dedicated to remembering this information though, right? Because
Correct.
It seems like there could be a risk of it becoming too centralized, right? Like if only one person has the notarized copy that Stephanie bought a house on this date with Bitcoin, that might be a problem. But if 100,000 people have that, then it's probably okay, right?
Well, actually, no, because these transactions will still be mined. They'll still be propagated across the network. They'll still have proof of work and they'll still have the same security. The full blockchain will include everything. The only question is whether in the in-memory database of spendable transactions you keep in a wallet application or in a payment application, whether you have to keep these things. So essentially it creates two types of full nodes. Those are the transaction focused and those that are more archival focused and just keep a full copy of the blockchain for archival purposes. I don't see it as a problem for centralization. All of this stuff will be in the blockchain. It will be mined and is just as secure as any other transaction.
Do you think this will change how people use the blockchain for things like notary purposes?
Oh, absolutely. It creates a really, really neat solution. Now you can create an output that is clearly for storing data. It's got enough space to do a SHA-512 hash. It has 80 bytes, so you can do a SHA-512 and have some room for some additional metadata. And you can then clearly identify these transactions and process them. So they're not just raw data, they're kind of structured. All of that really is going to make for much more efficient use of the blockchain as an information store. I expect all of the notarization services, as soon as this is widely available, to switch to implementing it because it's a much cleaner solution.
This is a service that's being offered to these people who want to embed information into the blockchain, but they don't actually have to change what they're doing, though, do they?
It's not a service.
The method they've been using will work.
The method they've been using will work. It will be less efficient and it's kludgy. But what this is a transaction operand in the transaction language that is used to build transactions. So if before you had, 12 verbs for building transactions, now you have 13 verbs for building transactions. And one of the exotic types of transactions you can build is kind of this data content transaction. Now keep in mind, the vast majority of transactions on the blockchain follow a very, very simple pattern, which is pay whoever has this public hash address. The vast majority are address A pays address B, but the transaction scripting language is much, much more sophisticated and complicated than that. And you can do a wide variety of things. So this gives people more language to use when creating transactions. So when they create these transactions, they can be explicit about them being data content rather than kludgy and building custom transactions that are faked.
So how would someone actually go about using this? Here's the next quote. The core code has no easy way of creating these new transaction outputs. You have to create them yourself using the raw transactions API. And there are no plans to display the data in Bitcoin QT, so you don't have to worry about someone sending you a few millibits and attaching a short but annoying message to the transaction.
This is no different from what we have today. I mean, none of these fake transactions can be created without having direct access to transaction API. Essentially, you hand code these with your own code to build these transactions. It's really not that hard. It's only about 3 lines of code to build a transaction like this in pretty much any language. There's no difference in those terms from what we had before. You still will need to build custom code to create these transactions. The only difference is that now you have the explicit verbs to do that and you're not faking it.
So the next section deals with auto tools. Reading from Gavin's blog post, less controversial, I hope, but more disruptive to core development, we've switched from using hand-coded platform-specific makefiles and QMake.
Basically, makefiles that are automatically generated with auto tools.
Yeah.
So Andreas, when they're talking about auto tools here, this is dealing with how they actually roll out new versions, right?
No, this is the build system. This is taking source code and converting it into binaries for all of the various platforms. Bitcoin is a multi-platform source base, a single code base that compiles to multiple targets. You can take the same Bitcoin code and compile it for Windows, for OS X, for Linux, for, a very wide variety of POSIX compatible operating systems. Up to now, each one of those had its own kind of custom. So if it's OS X version blah, do this. Now it's using auto tools, which probe each system. They use some heuristics to try to identify what type of system is, what capabilities it has, and then automatically generate the appropriate package. This matters for 2 reasons. 1, it makes it much easier to keep the code base generic while simultaneously broadening the number of targets that this code can be deployed to. And 2, it makes it a lot easier to run automated testing suites on the various builds. So for example, new code is released or a pull request is pulled in or a patch is pulled in, that immediately needs testing. So now you can run automated tools that not only test, say, the Linux version, which is the easiest, but you can also run testing on every version of Windows, every version of OS X, and do regression testing, etc. with those. So it makes it much easier to do automated builds and, more importantly, automated testing.
Andreas, could I think about this as like standardizing the way that the various clients are being built?
Yes, exactly. It's standardizing them to the most common build platform, which most POSIX operating systems support, and it makes it possible to vastly expand the targets. Yeah.
Also, as a standard user of Bitcoin, but not someone who really gets into the technical side, is this something that I actually need to care about?
No. But if you had to download the code and, say, compile it on Linux in order to use it, to test out Bitcoin QT or run Bitcoin daemon as a node, a full node on your Unix system or a hosted server, you'd have to compile Bitcoin. Now, up to now, that involved running QMake and a few other things, and it was a bit of a hit and miss thing. Like, oh, it's not quite the version of Ubuntu, it has a slightly different version of this library, and then you have to fix all these dependencies. With this new system, you type 3 commands, autogen, configure, and make, and it would basically figure all that out and build it for you. And it makes that process a lot simpler and more standardized. Also makes it easier to package and include in various operating systems using the operating system standard package manager. So for example, in Linux, you might have RPMs for Red Hat, or you have deb packages for Ubuntu and Debian. On OS X, you have dpackage or DMG for archives for applications, and on Windows you have, install shield exes or whatever they're using these days on Windows. So it allows you to essentially create automatic installers easier as well.
EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB. You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.
Today on Let's Talk Bitcoin, we're joined by one of my favorite guests and entrepreneurs in the space. Alan Reiner is the founder and CEO of Armory Technologies, and he joins us once again on the show. Alan, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Adam, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Backing up a second, Armory is pretty much my wallet of choice, and I am not bashful about that at all. It has a lot of really interesting features, and you've been developing it as an open source project for the last 2 years. You've made a lot of progress in that amount of time, and it's become a fairly popular wallet. You just went through a round of funding that saw you upgrade your company, which used to be an LLC, to a full-size, corporation. Can you tell us how your journey kind of went about from being a hobbyist open source project to something that's fully funded?
Actually, for the first year and a half, I wasn't anything in terms of companies. I was just a random hobbyist. I still had a full-time job doing missile defense contracts at a contractor in the DC area. And I was working on Armory in my spare time. Now, as Bitcoin started to get bigger and Armory started to get bigger and Armory's features were in higher demand and people had more money from the growing value of Bitcoin, they felt more pressure to protect that. And Armory has slowly become a trusted choice for those people who are the most paranoid about security. Basically, as a part-time hobby, it kind of got bigger than I could handle as a part-timer. I got a first level of funding, a very small amount of funding to help convince my fiance to let me quit my job. Within a few months, we had Trace Mayer come along and wanted to give us more funding and more serious funding, not just to let me quit my job, but to hire other people to do so, because he believes, everyone involved here believes that Armory is going to play a big role in helping people secure their money, and that there just aren't a lot of other tools that do this.
Let's talk about those tools. There hasn't been a lot of development in the wallet space, kind of surprising to a lot of people. I sort of attribute this to the fact that when you have something that works, even if it's not super usable, the fact that it works and that it's freely available in the Satoshi client has sort of made it so, it's hard to monetize the wallet space unless you're doing something super revolutionary. This is clearly a problem that you've run into.
That's been a topic of discussion. There's even been talk on the Bitcoin Forum Foundations. People have noted that wallets are difficult to monetize. And it's we're definitely breaking new ground here. And Trace and myself are definitely taking a gamble in terms of whether we think we can turn an open source project into something that makes money. And luckily, Trace and the other investors and, everyone closely related to us, we all like Bitcoin. So at the very least, we hope that we will be able to develop tools that help grow Bitcoin, even if the company doesn't find all those monetization avenues. But of course, we're pretty optimistic about that too.
So is there an expectation that you'll be monetizing this project from the investors?
Eventually.
Do you have any light to shed on that question and on how you would go about monetizing something like this? Or is it still definitely in the pot?
We have probably dozens of different ways that we can see bringing in money. It's difficult to know which one of those are going to bear the most fruit and how much effort it's going to be to explore those paths. At the moment, we're in the mode that we want to get the tools built, to keep this thing open source, help grow Bitcoin, and the investors are basically saying they're in no rush to make a return on this. And we are absolutely planning to explore those avenues, but we really want to have a good product before we start trying to monetize it. We're a little concerned that if we were to divert resources to building the revenue channels, that we'd be hurting ourselves, because the product is still not as mature as we'd like it to be. It works very well functionally, but its usability is kind of lacking right now.
So let's talk about that for a second. Armory, on the one hand, has all of these really interesting, and I think a lot of them are actually unique as far as Bitcoin wallets are concerned, features. But on the other hand, it does use a lot of system resources and requires you to run Bitcoin D in the background. So, I mean, from a technology standpoint, what are the things that you're working on towards improvements of what you have right now?
Well, I'll tell you that my core goal in Armory has been security at all costs. And a lot of people see that because they find that you have to really want to use Armory to use it. I mean, there's a lot of issues like with RAM resources. People have actually gone and upgraded their computers just to be able to run Armory. We're actually nearing very close to solving a whole bunch of those issues all at once. That isn't resolved yet. So at this moment, if you're getting excited about Armory and you have less than 8 gigs of RAM, you might have some difficulty running the current version. That's because that usability aspect hasn't been our priority. Right now, we're trying to fill the niche, something that maximizes security and whatever it takes. And part of that is when we talk about running Bitcoin QT in the background, it's because that is the safest way, the most secure way to communicate with the Bitcoin network. It could take me months and months and months to re-implement that, and it wouldn't be as good, and it would have security flaws. As much as people don't like running Bitcoin QT in the background, if you're really using the app because you want the security and the privacy, that's what you need to do.
So, Alan, for someone who's never used Armory before or really just has been exposed to the Satoshi client, which is that default client that everybody downloads the first time, can you explain what some of kind of the base features that differentiate Armory from other wallets that are out there?
I think the most important feature of Armory is the backups. It's kind of difficult to describe, what's really going on under the hood. The Satoshi client, Bitcoin QT, whatever you want to call it, I wish they'd come up with a better name for that, randomly generates addresses. They generate a pool of them. And when you run out of that pool, it makes more, but it's not deterministic, which means that if you were to restore your wallet to a previous version and regenerate those addresses, you'd get different addresses. That's a serious problem in terms of backups. One of the things that I think is most important for people's security, both security from other people and security from themselves, is being able to do backups. And people are really bad at persistent backups. So Armory implements a one-time backup system that's as secure as the method that Bitcoin QT uses. And in fact, Bitcoin QT and all the other clients are moving to a similar scheme. Armory has had that for 2 years, where you make your wallet the first time, and then you can print off a sheet of paper, or if you don't have a printer, you can write down the data on the sheet of paper. And that's all you need ever. You can use millions and billions of addresses, send and receive money as much as you want. No matter what happens, that piece of paper will always recover your money.
Why are you able to do this where the Satoshi client is not?
It's not a matter of capability, it's a matter of priorities. It will be a pretty dramatic change for the Satoshi client to implement that, because it involves overhauling their wallet code, which is very, very sensitive code. There's something called BIP32, Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. BIP32 actually specifies a similar scheme, and all the wallet developers have committed to implementing that. It's just that I wrote Armory with that from the start, not BIP32, but related. So I wrote Armory from the start with this scheme in place. I didn't have to modify anything to implement it. In one way, that was one of my motivations for starting Armory, was that you dig through the forums and you see people either losing money because of stale backups or overwrote backups or something. There's just so many ways for that to go wrong. And if you're protecting a lot of money, you really just want simple and easy. And it's very easy to just print off a backup once with Armory and then forget about it. Go put it in a safe deposit box and never think about it again.
So one of the other things that Armory has innovated recently, or it's coming out very soon, is this idea of fragmented backups. And I think you're the first implementation of them, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Is that the right term for it? I'm calling them fragmented backups. I don't know if there's an official term.
That's a term that I've used in Armory. The real term for it is Shamir secret sharing. It's called secret splitting, or you can split a piece of data, which in this case is your backup. You would normally print a single sheet of paper, and that sheet of paper protects your wallet. You can use that sheet of paper to recover all of your funds anytime in the future. But people who have concerns about physical security don't like the idea that there's a single point of failure, that someone who gets this piece of paper can instantly take all of your money. There's a common cryptography technique called Shamir secret sharing, and I've labeled it fragmented backups, so that this one sheet of paper you would normally print instead might be 3 sheets of paper, and any 2 of them is sufficient for recovering your wallet. And that really, it increases the physical security dramatically. Maybe you keep one at home, put one in a safe deposit box, give one to your parents. to hold on to, or bury it in your backyard, or whatever. That gives you the capability that if someone goes digging in your backyard, or they snooping in safe deposit boxes, they still can't get the coins.
How does this compare in terms of security to something like a digital backup on either another hard drive or another computer? I mean, do you think that it's just flat out better to have physical copies of backups, regardless of whether it's fragmented or just a single piece?
Absolutely. Digital copies are not going to be nearly as reliable as a physical piece of paper, and not to mention that digital copies are digital, which means that they're stored in places that a lot of people want to encrypt it and put it online, or store it in Dropbox or some other place. A lot of issues because, you put it to a USB key, but you don't know whether in 2 years that USB key is going to work. So you make a couple different copies and you spread them around. It's rather suboptimal to do it that way. We believe that being able to have a physical piece of paper that can't be accessed from anyone on the internet, that you can just tuck away in a safe deposit box or, on your bookshelf, is really the best way to secure yourself.
One of the other things that Armory does that is sort of different from a lot of the other wallets out there is it gives you the ability to maintain multiple wallets and have a lot of control over what each one does. You have individual coin control so that so when you're making a transaction, you can actually pick which inputs, if you want to get this deeply into it, which sometimes I do, that gets sent out so that you can control your privacy leaks and things like that. Do you think that most users, or that a normal user is going to use multiple wallets moving forward? Because I use 8, but I think I'm pretty abnormal as far as most people are concerned.
I think the capability to use multiple wallets is fairly powerful. It gives a much clearer separation of funds, especially if you're talking about the other feature of Armory, which is the holy grail feature of being able to keep some money offline on offline wallets for extra security. You have to balance your convenience and your security. You want to keep the majority of your funds in a super secure wallet, which might be an offline wallet. But when you're just online and you want to buy something small, you don't want to have to go through that inconvenience of accessing the offline computer. So being able to keep multiple different wallets for different purposes is good. We'd like to eventually integrate a mobile app, and then you'd be able to track the mobile wallet from your computer and refill it or sweep the money out of it if you lose your phone or something like that. That's a future benefit of having this kind of multi-wallet interface already designed. You can use it not only for your own wallets, you can use it for watching other people's wallets, like your phone wallet or multi-sig addresses. They're not developed yet, but to be able to create addresses that require multiple signatures, you need to be able to see other people's wallets. They will give you those for that purpose. I don't know do any of the other clients have multiple wallets? I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, I think that you can do it, but it has more to do with like swapping your wallet.dat file and creating an actual new wallet and then just swapping the files back and forth. I've done that in the past. The creating watching only copies of the wallets is really interesting. I just set that up for our CFO to watch all of the accounts that he needs to be watching. It was a very easy process. Did I miss any of the relevant features that we should go over now before talking about future development?
I think it's worth emphasizing the offline wallets feature just because it is something that is mostly unique to Armory, and it's one of the reasons why people use Armory. It's probably the core reason people use it.
So I've never used it for that, to be perfectly honest with you. I've used the backups before, but I haven't done the signing on another computer. Can we talk about? Okay, so the idea is to get your private keys off of a computer that has access to the internet, because if the computer has access to the internet, then that means the internet has access to it, which means that you might be vulnerable to viruses or a hacker or something like that. So how exactly would I make a transaction with an offline balance in this way?
I'm going to skip over the details of setting up the wallet for a second, just so you can appreciate the process. Once it's set up, people say, well, if it's offline, how do you send money? And the way it works is that the wallet shows up in your online computer. It looks identical, besides having a different color, and it'll be labeled offline. You'll be able to see all of your balances on the online computer. You'll be able to give out payment addresses so people can pay you. It really behaves exactly like any other wallet in terms of verifying payments and all that. The difference is that when you actually go to send money, just like you would with a regular hot wallet, you'll still be able to fill out all the recipients and everything, but there will be no send button because the data that you need to send the transaction is not on that computer. And this is the power of it, is that you can still do everything you would do with a regular wallet, but you can't send the money, which means that someone who accesses your computer can't send the money either. Instead of sending the money, the button will save the data to a USB key. And you just take that USB key to the offline computer, you hit sign, you bring it back and you hit broadcast. And that's how the transaction is completed. If you have the computers right next to each other, this computer that's never touched the internet that has the wallet on it, you can do it in like literally 60 to 90 seconds. It's very quick. Rather than hitting send, it's just going to save it to the USB key, pop it out, put it in the other computer, sign it, bring it back, hit broadcast. Once you do it probably 2 or 3 times, it becomes a breeze.
That does sound easy, actually. I assumed it was a much more difficult process, but yeah, that sounds really simple. Are there any weaknesses to that approach besides the fact that you actually have to do steps that involve something outside of your computer?
This is definitely, it's 2 orders of magnitude better than anything else out there.
So the founder of Armory Wallet says that based on current available technology, secure a way to store your Bitcoins and still have them available to transact in a relatively hassle-free way.
Absolutely. There just really isn't anything better. This can be improved incrementally by improving your processes for setting up the offline computer. Also, USB keys are not the best thing in the world for accessing secure systems. I would much prefer people use USB keys for online, offline computers and have them just keep it online because it's too inconvenient otherwise. Although USB keys, the mechanism for moving data back and forth between the computers is not ideal, it's still far better than saying, oh, this is too complicated, I'm going to just keep it online because it's easier. We're actually working on developing some other mechanisms for the people who desire even more security for moving that data back and forth without the caveats of USB keys.
What do you think of the hardware devices we've started to see appear? The first one would be the Trezor, which I believe either just came out or is just about to come out. Is this a good replacement? Is this a different technique, or is it just an improvement to the technique because instead of having a separate full-blown computer, you just have a dedicated device?
I would say that they're a 70% solution. I believe they're an advancement for Bitcoin technology. They will be very easy. With a Trezor, or I know at one point Butterfly Labs was creating something called BitSafe, but I haven't heard of it in a while. With those devices, you get most of the benefits of an offline computer. And if the application is set up right, for instance, Armory will be supporting Trezor, it should be very simple. However, it doesn't quite have the same confidence level as setting up your own system. In this case, you would be using Armory and you would be using this hardware device. There's a lot of concerns that the device may not actually be secure or may not have the same firmware or software that the developers have said it does, whether maliciously or accidentally. I don't want to discredit them at all. It's just, from a pure security perspective, you want as little as possible the process of moving your money. And the more pieces you bring into the process, the more places you've opened up security vulnerabilities.
Right. The more places you have the potential for something to go wrong. So right. Even if they have good intentions, it's still, because it's a standardized piece of hardware that's specifically intended for this purpose, could be compromised either internally or externally.
Don't get me wrong. I still believe that it's going to be dramatically better than keeping the money on an online computer. There's just so many ways for that to go wrong. And I think it's fine for a little bit of cash. And it's convenient and all that. I think the hardware wallets are going to fill demand that's something that's in high demand, which is a nice compromise between getting the full offline computer and keeping everything online. The next thing about the offline computer is you get a whole lot of extra flexibility. You can do a lot more management. You have a lot more control over the wallets. With the recent vulnerabilities in random number generators, we'll be adding something to help you, something like Dice or card shuffling, to reduce your reliance on the random number generator in the computer, which has been found to be not as secure as people had hoped.
You took the recent, revelations about the random numbers maybe not being so random as a reason to start working towards implementing solutions that don't even use a random number generator.
Yep. Oh. Exactly.
That's very cool. That's great, Alan.
And part of that comes from our users. As soon as something comes out, news that says Bitcoins were compromised in this other app, the first thing that happens is I get 20 emails saying, oh my God, is this a problem with Armory? Wait, are you secure? Did you know about this? Some people are holding a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they want to make sure they're covered. So I've had this idea for a while, actually, and then all the NSA revelations and security vulnerabilities have really pushed it up on the priority list for us.
What has it been like going from having this be an open source project that you're working on in your spare time by yourself to something where eventually you're able to make it your full-time job and then now are bringing on additional people. I mean, how has that been? Is this where you expected to find yourself a couple of years down the road when you started this?
Well, certainly not when I started this. I didn't expect to end up here, you know. In fact, when I started this, I wasn't even planning to release end user software. I was just creating tools for analyzing the blockchain, analyzing the network, and playing with various concepts that I was learning. And it slowly evolved into what it is now. I anticipate it would just be a long-term, you know, open source project. There's a lot of them out there that are developed by just a couple people that persist, and people are happy with them. Not major projects, but, you know, little projects. And I had anticipated this would be a little project, but I didn't see Bitcoin getting as big as it is getting, and it definitely deserves full-time attention from me now. I will admit that things have been very slow. I've definitely been much more distracted than I expected to be. There is so much legal process and just so many steps involved with going through the incorporation, especially when you're doing like an actual corporation rather than just an LLC and you're setting up different share classes and such. There's a whole bunch of agreements and legal stuff. Also, doing recruiting, getting your book set up, stuff like that has been just a lot more overwhelming than I expected. So I know a lot of users are disappointed that I haven't been able to get out the latest release, which solves a lot of the resource issues. But I promise you guys, it's coming soon. A lot of those things are out of the way now, so I can focus on that development. And we got a couple new guys who are helping out, although they're still kind of in the learning phase. They are accelerating what's happening on the development side.
So what are you working towards right now with the team as it is? I mean, what are the priorities that you're focused on at this point?
The current version of Armory, 0.88.1, it's been there. It's been on the website for the past 6 months. That version will take about 6 gigs of RAM, which is enormous, and it'll scan the blockchain on every load, which can take anywhere from 3 minutes to like 30 minutes. So remember when I was talking about convenience and security and
right.
maximize security at the cost of convenience? Well, you can see you need a strong computer and you need to wait a while every time you start it. We're finally getting around to fixing that. Things like Satoshi Dice and just the general growth of the network has accelerated this problem much faster than I had expected. So now this has become a priority. The new version, for which there's a testing version out right now, uses only 200 to 300 megs of RAM. It uses probably 1/20th the amount of RAM, and it should be fairly constant. So you could even use it on a, quote, regular computer. And it saves all the data between loads so that it can start up, in less than a minute, and frequently much faster than that. This is a huge improvement for Armory. It's just that at the moment, there's still some usability bugs in there that we have to get worked out with some crashes and a new data structure is corrupted or something like that. So we're working on getting that out, we hope, in the next couple of weeks. Of course, no one's going to believe me when I say in the next couple of weeks, because I've said that a lot of times.
Just say soon. Just say It'll be out soon.
It'll be out soon.
So once the RAM problem is dealt with, it sounds like, so why exactly has this been such a problem? Because I don't think it's a problem for many other wallet clients, is it? What are you doing differently that turned this into a problem?
Remember when I said this was really more of a hobbyist project? It wasn't even intended to be end user software when I started it. The way the engine was written was not meant to be scalable. And it worked great for the first year of actually being an end user product, but it didn't have the scalability there. I was okay with it because the growth of the network didn't look like it was that fast. I said, okay, I'll have plenty of time to get all these great features developed, and then I can upgrade that. The network grew so much faster than I had anticipated, and it really was not designed for that from the start. So it was just a decision that was made early on in the development process before I even knew that this was going to turn into a widely used application, and before I realized how fast the Bitcoin network was going to grow.
So in the next couple of months, we're going to see the release of Bitcoin 0.9 or Bitcoin D 0.9, which is kind of a major release that, among other things, incorporates a new payment protocol. Essentially let merchants make payment requests, and then instead of having a Bitcoin address show up, it'll actually reference a third party who will send back a name. And so, like, if I have a payment that's going to me, instead of it going to one of my addresses, it would show up for the person paying me as just sent to Adam Levine or whatever my moniker is on there. Can you talk to me about what the significance is of this? And I mean, are there any things that you see wrong with it, or is this really the right way to go?
Well, I'll tell you, one of our I've assigned one of our new guys to basically be the guy that deals with payment protocol. I'm only aware at a top level what it's doing, so I can't speak too intelligently on it other than I'm all for the gist of what it's doing. I mean, the idea of adding confidence to the payment process, being able, when someone sends you an email and says, send money to this address, you really don't have any confidence. I mean, you have confidence that it's right, but it's easy for an intelligent attacker to manipulate the system. And this really dramatically increases the amount of effort to manipulate the system, redivert funds. There's a lot of debate, I don't want to call it controversy, but a lot of concern that it's being built on technologies like SSL. When you go to an HTTPS website, a secure website, it's built on the same thing, which hasn't had the best history, especially in recent light of all the NSA activities, but it's really the best thing out there in terms of widespread use and adoption. And so we're just piggybacking on that to improve the confidence of money being moved around.
One of the things I thought was interesting about it was that in the payment protocol, there are third parties that verify the address and name of the person, basically, which is what you're talking about. There are some problems with, like, this certificate authority has been accused of not being a tremendously effective system. One of the things I noticed about the way Bitcoin is implementing it is that just about anybody who has trust can become one of these certificate authorities. So, I mean, does that mean that, like, Let's Talk Bitcoin with our listeners and all this stuff could start issuing certificates to people based on, I mean, like, could we do that? Would that work in this system?
Unfortunately, I can't talk too much about that. That's a little lower level than I know. But what I will tell you is that it's intended to basically piggyback on the existing certificate authority system, so that any certificate authority, whenever you go to a secure website, HTTPS, and you don't get an error showing up there, it's because there's a certificate authority somewhere, some company that has vouched for the identity of that website. And technically, you should be able to do the exact same thing with a payment protocol, is that merchants should be able to go and get essentially a signature from the same certificate authorities to vouch for their identity. However, I know that it was also designed to be extensible so that you can have other webs of trust used. I don't know that much about how easily they'll be used, but I know that I brought up some of my own use cases for authenticating merchants, which we plan to do at some point. And we were told that it is extensible for that. And that's one of the reasons why I've got one of my guys looking at that now to figure out how to implement it and then how to extend it to do what we need it to do.
So Armory will support payment protocol at some point in the future then?
Yes.
Well, the time always flies, Alan, but can you share with us the plans at Armory Technologies for the longer term development of your product? And I mean, is this going to be the only product that Armory Technologies develops, or will there be others?
So we definitely have plans for developing a mobile app, not just an app separated from everything else. I mean, we want to have kind of a contiguous system where all your devices kind of are aware of each other. And we have some ideas for how to do that, so that, you know, you can have your wallet on your phone and you can have a wallet on your computer, and you can have perhaps multi-signature. You have accounts that are shared by you and your wife, or shared between you and friends, or board of directors of a company, kind of thing. This is all in the future, but we see it as all part of Armory. Armory itself is going to be simply expanding to absorb all these new use cases. One of the big things we're working on is we're going to do the hardware wallet integration. We want to be supporting those hardware wallets as soon as they come out. I don't know if we'll make it in time, but, you know, shortly afterwards we'll have support for that, and you'll be able to go to the Trezor website and get a Trezor, and it will work natively with Armory. Longer term, we plan to innovate the multi-signature transactions, and we believe this is absolutely critical for bigger companies, more wealthy parties to get involved, because as it stands, the only way to use Bitcoin is with money that requires single signature to move, and that's just too fragile for companies or individuals that are holding very large sums of money. They want separation of duties. They want the increased security of having to require multiple pieces to come together to move money. And so far, it looks like Armory will be the one innovating that. We're already the company that produced the product that people trust for security, and that's a very natural transition, is to kind of innovate that aspect of things and give people access to this very valuable tool.
Alan, if somebody wants to get involved with the project or download your software, what are the means to do that?
Well, you can go to www.bitcoinarmory.com. In fact, we got a new website, so it looks snazzier. You can go to bitcoinarmory.com. On the front of the page, there's a big orange button that says download now. It's available for Windows, Linux, and most of Mac. If you're on a Mac, I can tell you that flip a coin, and if it comes up heads, it'll work flawlessly for you. And if not, you might have to wait.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask about that. I tried to install it on our Mac yesterday, and I had mixed results. Is that something that you're going to be focused on in the next couple of months? I mean, like, is that
yes. We actually have a couple leads on how to fix that issue. It's on the list. We have some resources devoted to it. So it definitely works on Windows and Linux, and it might work on your Mac. I'd say 50% of people report flawless functionality. The other 50% say they can't even start it. So if you're lucky, you can use it on Mac. A new version should be out soon. So if you're on a system that doesn't have as much RAM, you can wait a little bit. We'll have a version for you soon.
Have you finished your hiring since getting funded, or are you still looking for any positions?
Actually, no, we haven't finished the hiring. We have a pool of applicants. I guess I could use this opportunity to advertise that we wouldn't mind some more applicants who have a strong technical background and seriously committed to solving fun problems. We think that there's a lot of fun problems to be solved here and get on the bleeding edge of this emerging new technology. And if that's the case, if anyone out there has superhero developer status and you're looking to change jobs, we'll be happy to entertain. And you can send your resume to support@bitcoinarmory.com or info@bitcoinarmory.com, and we'll get in touch with you. At the moment, we have about 4 or 5 people involved, but we're still looking for a couple more.
Alan Reiner, founder and CEO of Armory Technologies. Once again, thanks very much for joining us, and look forward to continuing to see your work.
Thanks, Adam.
Hi, Stephanie here. Would you like to turn your book into an enthralling audiobook? Need a persuasive commercial to promote your company? How about a narrator for your explainer video? Here's where I can help. I'm a freelance voiceover artist, and since 2009, I've lent my voice to dozens of audio projects. To hear some examples of my work, check out my website, smvoice.info. If you like what you hear, I'd love to be the voice of your next project. Get in touch at smvoice.info.
Hi, this is Jason King, founder at Sean's Outpost, and you are listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Sean's Outpost is a homeless outreach in Pensacola, Florida, and we are proudly powered by Bitcoin. To date, over 13,000 meals have been fed to the homeless in our area, all purchased with Bitcoin and through the generosity of the cryptocurrency community. Read more about us at seansoutpost.com. Food, shelter, Bitcoin, everybody. seansoutpost.com.
So the big piece of meat in this update is the payment protocol, but we're actually going to save that until the end because it's probably going to be a longer conversation than these other elements. Things that might make it into 0.9, but that they're working on right now, and that might also not make it, depending on how things go. So the first is no wallet mode, Bitcoin-CLI. This is again quoting from the article. Bitcoin D is increasingly being used as an edge router, used as a firewall between the full Bitcoin peer-to-peer network and some custom wallet or mining software to filter out any invalid blocks or transactions that might tickle bugs in the custom software's implementation of the Bitcoin protocol. The 0.9 release should contain Jeff Garczyk's disable wallet mode, which lets Bitcoin D run entirely without a wallet, making startup faster and using it less runtime memory intensive. We are slowly moving from a monolithic codebase that does everything, wallet, RPC, network, blockchain storage, validation, towards more modular internals with fewer dependencies between the different pieces. Another change you should see in the 0.9 release is moving away from the Bitcoin D executable, functioning both as a server and as an RPC client.
What is RPC?
A remote procedure call. There is a application programming interface sitting above Bitcoin D that allows you to access all of the Bitcoin internals, like give me this block, give me this transaction, sign this transaction, send this transaction. All of those commands are remote procedure commands. So Bitcoin D gives you an abstracted API into the Bitcoin's ecosystem that's very easy to program against. The vast majority of clients that sit on top of Bitcoin D communicate with it using this simple API.
Adam hasn't read this yet, but it says the RPC client code is eventually going to be removed from Bitcoin D.
It's put in a separate executable. So basically a lot of this is about modularizing and containing these things into their own systems. The problem is that right now Bitcoin D is one big hairball of code. Let me clarify that. It started off as an enormous big hairball of code and has gradually been getting better and better in terms of modularity. This is great news because if you modularize these components, it allows other systems to re-implement them, to replace them, or to only run the bits that they need. And that will spur a lot of innovation. It also means that there's a lot less dependency on having the full and complete reference client for anything you need to do, and will allow you to gradually perhaps move to a more multi-platform, multi-client system.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I just have one more question. Why would somebody want to run the Bitcoin client without running a wallet?
Actually, I run the Bitcoin client without a wallet all the time. So, for example, if you're running a payment service, you don't necessarily want to have the wallet on the node that's processing transactions from the outside, which is facing the internet. You might actually have two Bitcoin implementations. One that's simply acting as a node on the network, passing information back and forth. It's your gateway into the network, an edge router, as Gavin put it. The other thing is that the Bitcoin D system is the de facto reference client for validating transaction. A transaction reaches consensus if all the current versions of Bitcoin D says it reaches consensus. So the only thing you need to know as a developer as to whether consensus happened is, does the Bitcoin D thing like it? Great. Then it's acceptable. That means you have to run Bitcoin D to do all of the transaction validation, but you don't always want the wallet on the same system for security reasons. This allows you to separate from a single-tier monolithic application that does everything to making a multi-tier application, having an edge router that's Bitcoin D that only does node work. Then you have an RPC client that's sitting further inside the network, can only be accessed from internal systems and gives you a programmatic interface. And then way in the back of the network, protected with firewalls, you have the wallet application that isn't running any of the other things and only handles wallet functions like signing transactions with keys. And that gives you three tiers. You have a nice separation of functions, and it's good for security, it's good for performance, it's good for scaling.
You can also kind of think about it like the way that Apple used to do their hardware relative to the PC market that we know today. Right now, the way that Bitcoin D is set up, you can buy a computer or no computer, but what we're moving towards is a system where you can, buy RAM or buy, a different monitor, buy various things that allow you to take that technology and integrate it with something else or create something yourself and then build on top of it using the parts that you want, as opposed to just having the option of having all or nothing.
Yeah, the problem with the all or nothing is really nothing isn't an option because you cannot do anything on the main network without referring to Bitcoin D's validation capability. So effectively, if you did anything, you did everything. It was always all. And that was a problem. You had to take the Bitcoin D and run everything in one place. Now, most people would do that with an empty wallet, which is better than having a wallet with money in it, but it still means you're running all of the overhead of the code. Plus, if there are bugs in that code, you're now exposing it to the internet to be exploited. The less code you expose by turning it off, the better.
Plus, for the average user, I mean, I run Armory Wallet and I have to have a copy of the Satoshi client running in the background because it was simply so much easier for them to just use the existing client for that type of functionality connecting than it was to build it into their own system because there was a lot of complexity with that. Additionally, what they're talking about isn't the only implementation of Bitcoin out there. There's another one called Libitcoin that hasn't seen a lot of distribution but is in the final stages of development that Amir Taki's been working on for the last 2 years that basically already does this, already has looked at the problem and said, okay, rather than having one monolith construct, we're just going to build from the ground up the idea that all of these things are individual modular pieces that can be plugged together as you see fit, but that ultimately each one is its own separate piece. So it's good to see the core development team catching up with this and moving in that direction too.
Yeah, in fact, it's really important because even if you have competing options which are more modular and better designed, in order for these competing options to remain relevant, they have to follow the main reference client in every quirk and every bug from every block from the Genesis block 0 in August of 2009 to today. Every bug that was ever in the client has to be replicated precisely so that you validate in exactly the same way and arrive at the same consensus at the end of all of these blocks. That means that when you had to adopt the client and you had to adopt all of it or none of it, essentially it was killing innovation and development of alternative clients because there's too much work to try to keep up with a moving target. Modularity will greatly help the cause of a multi-client Bitcoin network.
Andreas, that bug comment that you made there, where every bug has to be replicated because everything has to reckon back to that one Genesis block. Is it possible to make retroactive changes to the Bitcoin system? Like if we wanted to affect, transactions that happened a year ago, is that even possible?
Not really.
Okay.
Well, you could if you basically arrived at consensus to ignore what's in the blockchain or ignore certain transactions. And there are bugs. For example, in the blockchain, there are transactions that really shouldn't have been validated and should never have made it into the blockchain, but because there was a bug in the client, they did. And now, in order to validate that transaction in the future, you have to reintroduce that bug or simulate that bug in every future client so that when it reaches that broken transaction, it behaves exactly like the broken client did then and accepts it. So you have to repeat the mistakes of the past in order to arrive at the same consensus of the present. That's a problem. We have to reincorporate all of the bugs. Now, another way of doing it is checkpointing. And this comes to the next topic in our list, which is the headers first parallel download chain sync. But essentially what we're looking at is summarizing parts of the blockchain and being able to operate faster with a smaller part of the blockchain so you don't have to replicate everything.
This one is entitled Headers First Parallel Download Chain Sync. And there's some text here, but the idea of Headers First Sync is to download the blockchain in 2 stages. 1, download just headers from your peers, which is very quick because each block header is just 80 bytes. And 2, once you've got 1 or more chains of block headers, pick the one with the most proof of work and then fetch the full block for that chain. So basically, this is trying to make the initial onboarding process, right, where you download the Bitcoin client for the first time, and you have to go through that. Right now, it's like a 1 or 2 day process, depending on how fast your connection is to the network.
1 or 2 weeks.
It's now several days because it's already reached 15 gig.
Oh, really?
Yep.
So that's what this is an attempt at, though, right? Is trying to take that initial problem of having such a huge amount of data that has to be downloaded before a user can even make their first transaction on an actual wallet that's on their computer, is trying to make that a much faster experience that's more efficient, right?
Yes, I think the best way I can describe this is that while Bitcoin's network looks very much like the BitTorrent network, because of the constraints of the blockchain, the fact that in order to validate a block, you have to have the previous block for its hash, etc., we haven't been able to really fully exploit the BitTorrent-like capabilities. You can't just go out and connect to 100 nodes and download the blockchain parallel from all of them, because you'll end up with multiple blockchains, and including ones that have been orphaned and various other things. And you can't figure that out until you've downloaded everything. So what this proposal does is it allows you to incrementally download parts that are required for validation, the hash of the block header, for example, and then not download the bulk of the transactions inside until later. That means you can validate all of the chains up to today in terms of consistency and continuity. You still don't have all of the transactions that are in the past, and you can then incrementally download those, and you can get them from multiple clients because now you have one unbroken blockchain. You can just ask anybody for each one of the blocks. It's the true one. And that means you can now start behaving a bit like BitTorrent, going out, asking lots of nodes and getting a much increased bandwidth of return data. So this is great news. It will greatly increase the speed with which new full nodes will bootstrap into the blockchain, and we'll be able to start processing things much faster.
In our current system we have, then there's no parallel downloading. Right now, when you're downloading the blockchain for that first time, you are literally downloading from a single node out there?
Not necessarily from a single node, but you only download one block at a time. You start with block 0, which is encoded in the source code of your client. You already know what block 0 is. It's in every client. It's encoded statically in there. So you start with block 0. You say, okay, who's
so it's just chronological.
It's chronological. You have to bootstrap. Now, today, what you would say is, give me block 1, and you download the entire block with all of its transactions, validate it, and add it to your chain. Then download block 2. Now you can say, give me all the headers for all the blocks from 0 to blah, calculate the chain, and then start downloading transactions later. And then you could potentially parallelize that function and seek out from many nodes, many different blocks simultaneously. It's like making the edges of the puzzle first. So then once you've got the edges of the puzzle and you know what shape and size it is, now you can start filling in the center much faster. and you don't need to follow a specific pattern anymore.
Right. So this is different than what something like Electrum does, which is kind of like pick a checkpoint, kind of sync the blockchain after that point. This is not ignoring portions of the blockchain. It's basically just making the outline of the puzzle, like you said.
Well, yes. And in fact, the Electrum client, as a lightweight client, delegates its processing to master nodes that have the full blockchain. It doesn't keep a copy of the entire blockchain. It, in fact, doesn't keep a copy of any part of the blockchain, just checkpoints. What this is a full node, but one that bootstraps faster. It's not a lightweight node.
Thanks for listening to episode 55 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's show is provided by Stephanie Murphy, Andreas M. Antonopoulos, and Alan Reiner. Music was provided by Jared Rubens. Any questions or comments? Email adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. See you next time.